Thank you guys for being here. You know, as the senator and I were driving up to this museum tonight, I was just amazed. There's a museum of biblical art, and I thought that makes perfect sense. But I come from a California where it's probably illegal to have a museum of biblical art. This is kind of shocking to me to be here in Texas. I'm always happy to be here in Texas because this is the heart of freedom in America. I mean, this is really where freedom's heartbeat beats the loudest in the country. Last night, I was flying into Austin last night from California. As I was landing in Austin, I took a picture out the window. I sent it out to all our staff around the country and said, if it all falls down, this is where we're all headed, right? It's really the truth. This is the center of liberty in America. And so, you know, I want to give you a little bit of my own history so you understand why I'm doing this. I come out of the Tea Party movement. My background is I'm a lawyer. I hope you won't hold it against me. I was working from home. My specialty is some little arcane field called internet advertising law, and then the Tea Party movement happened. And like so many of us in the country, I was inspired. Everything I heard made perfect sense to me. I went out, held one of the first protests in the country in Sacramento, California, had no idea what I was getting into, ended up riding a wave to building the largest Tea Party organization in the country with a co-founder, Tea Party Patriots, ended up with 23 million members, 3,400 chapters. Congress changes over, the biggest change between parties in 2010 that we'd seen since the 1930s. It was radical, it was transformative. We were so excited for that session to come in. And then, nothing changed. They told us, of course, if they only had the Senate, that everything would be different because they're only one branch, right? And then we got the Senate. It was so exciting because we actually got the Senate, and then nothing changed. Now we're in a presidential election. They tell us if we elect the right president that everything will be different, right? I see lots of people shaking their heads. As I travel around the country, I haven't met anybody who actually believes that. I don't believe it. I'd love to hear a president say that they're going to dedicate their presidency to taking away the power of the president, taking away the power of the Supreme Court, taking away the power of Congress, and giving it back to the American people. Does anybody believe that any of these folks are going to say that when they get to D.C.? It goes against human nature. It's not what we do. When we get power, we hold on to power. We tend to consolidate power. It's just what people do. So like Tom, I was traveling all around the country, 34 states last year. This is my 8th state this year. And people kept asking me, Mark, what do we do? What do we do? It's not just a rhetorical question when you're a grassroots leader and you're supposed to have answers. I'm supposed to tell people what the plan is. And I would lay in bed at night and think, I don't know. I don't know. Pray? I mean, I'm glad we all pray. We've been praying for this country for a long time. Hopefully you have, I have. But the reality is that's not a plan. And then Mike Ferris brought the Convention of States to me, and I actually saw the plan. Because it's a plan that allows us to go around Congress, to go around the president, to go around the courts, and to do what the founders said we should always do, which is to be engaged citizens who actually were in control of the government. We are, after all, sovereign citizens, right? Okay, so that's what the founders intended. It's really instructive how Article 5, the second clause that gives us this power, got into the Constitution. Not really commonly known history. 2 days before the end of the convention is September 15th, 1787. Colonel George Mason from Virginia stands to address the assembly. Remember, 2 days left, they're getting ready to go home. Mason says to the assembly, we have a fundamental flaw with the document we've drafted. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we didn't give that power to the people acting through the states. And he asked this question, he said, are we so naive that we actually believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will propose appropriate amendments to restrain its own tyranny? I mean, you guys giggle. I imagine them slapping their foreheads, right? Oh, how did we forget that? And in fact, that's pretty much what Madison's notes reflect. Madison's notes are just like this long. There's no debate. They debated everything, right? I'm sure they debated the arrangement of the tables there. They didn't debate this. It was so obvious to the men assembled that they needed to give that power to the states that they unanimously adopted the second provision of Article 5, giving you, the people, the power to call a convention specifically for what? To restrain federal tyranny. They knew. They studied human nature, they studied history, they studied government. They knew that the government would centralize and eventually we, the people, would be forced to push back. So here we are today, hundreds of years later. We haven't used Article 5 ourselves. Congress has used it multiple times, but we've never used it. And I ask you, are we living under federal tyranny today?
Yes.
And we all just admitted that Congress isn't going to fix it. The president isn't going to fix this. You know, some of us thought maybe, until last year, maybe the Supreme Court. How'd that work out for us? So if they're not going to fix it, who's going to fix it? We are, that's right. You know, sometimes I imagine myself sitting with the founders and complaining about the problems that we're having in America today. And specifically, I think of Dr. Benjamin Franklin, because he was just kind of crusty and cantankerous. And I imagine sitting with him and explaining all the problems we have, and we have Obamacare, and we have this, and we have that. And I imagine him saying, what about Article 5? Have you used Article 5? And I imagine myself saying, well, you know, Dr. Franklin, there's a lot of people who are kind of scared about, and I mean, I imagine him slamming that pint of ale down on the table and saying, you're bothering me, boy, go do Article 5. Come back and tell me how it works out. It's not an option. It's a moral obligation. Amen. People spilled blood to give us that Constitution. People have spilled blood over the centuries to keep that Constitution intact, keep our freedom for us. And so we face a critical choice in American history right now. We're at a pivotal moment. We live, as Mark Levin says, in a post-constitutional republic. That's not our Constitution that we live under anymore. You know, we will hear people say to us all the time, well, the Constitution's just fine how it is. If they would just follow the Constitution, everything would be okay. Right? Well, here's the reality. Unfortunately, we have two constitutions in America now. We have the one in the National Archives under glass, and we love that Constitution. It's an incredible document. And then we have the Constitution we're forced to live under. Anybody know how big that one is? It's over 2,000 pages. That's our Constitution. Interpreted, twisted, perverted by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. That's the Constitution we live under. And so that's the reality we face. And we have to deal with the reality, right? Some people say reality is an acquired taste, but the reality is that one under glass isn't our Constitution anymore. What Tom and I and so many others, now 1.2 million activists around the country, are fighting for is to restore the vision of the founders, to go back to something that looks like that original Constitution. Anybody think we should go back to that original document? Yes. So here's the deal. If you believe that, and I'm pretty sure that almost everybody in this room believes that, there's only one way. There's only one way, right? Electing people, will that restore the Constitution? Will that reverse all that precedent? No, it can't change it. It's legally not possible. Literally not possible. How about that we just keep trying to go to the Supreme Court? You know, we tried this, right? So you get the right case coming up from the right district, through the right appellate courts, framed the right way with the right plaintiff, and you put it in front of the right Supreme Court, and then you cross paths with, say, John Roberts. Anybody think we have another 100, 150 years to correct our jurisprudence? We don't. We have one choice. To those who say that we shouldn't do this, I ask this question, what is our alternative? Everyone is in agreement. The country essentially has failed. Tom described over $140 trillion in unfunded liabilities. I honestly don't even know what that means. Tom had to break it down for us, $1 million per taxpayer. It's unbelievable, it's unfathomable, and it is untenable. The Republic will not survive. We have reached this critical moment in history. History is going to judge us. Everybody in this room, this entire country, we will be judged by history one way or another. We've reached a fork in the road. We have a choice to make. Ronald Reagan called it a rendezvous with destiny, right? We have a choice to make. Will we take the action that's necessary? Will we call the convention, or will we sentence our children to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness? That's the question facing us today. This is an existential question. Today, 1.2 million activists have answered that question. They're not going to sit on the sidelines and watch this country fall. Today, 37 state legislatures have resolutions introduced calling for a convention of states. Never before in American history have so many state legislatures introduced identical resolutions. We've made history already. It's incredible. The people are on the march. Florida, Georgia, Alaska, Alabama, and just last week, Tennessee became the 5th state to pass the Convention of States resolution. We passed the Indiana Senate with flying colors. We came out of the Arizona House. New Mexico passed it out of their house. It's incredible what's happening. Amazing hearing in Ohio today. Are rising all across this country because they are doing what their birthright is. They are behaving as sovereign citizens. You know, you're going to hear a lot. People are going to tell you, if you talk about this idea, that you should be scared that we're going to lose our Constitution. Tom and I are going to answer as many questions as you want. Mainly, we've set it up to be a Q&A. I'm going to answer some of those questions in advance first. People say the convention's going to run away. We're going to lose our Constitution. What do you think is going to happen if we don't have a convention? Right? We've already lost it. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, let me just give you the end game. You got to forgive me. I went to public school in Los Angeles, California, so my math isn't so good. But I can add and subtract at about a third grade level. And here's how the math works, right? Let's presume that everything that the naysayers and the fearmongers say is true, and the convention goes crazy, and it's taken over by wild people from California, and they propose craziness, and maybe they even propose the repeal of the Second Amendment. I hear this all the time. I see it in emails. I hear people say it to me. So you got to ask yourself this question. It takes 38 states to ratify any amendment. Flip that math on its head. Only 13 states to stop any amendment. This is what you have to believe if you believe in the runaway convention. Not an option, by the way. If runaway's in your mind, this has to be in your mind also. The 13 most conservative states in America, states like Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, the Carolinas, the Dakota, Oklahoma. Thank you, Tom. You have to believe that Oklahoma will vote to take away your guns. Is there anybody in here who actually believes that? It's crazy. But I'm going to tell you something about fear. Fear is one of the most powerful human emotions there is. And when people tell you you're scared, you're going to hear some things that come out of fear. People get a little bit irrational. It gets a little bit squirrely when people are scared. And I understand that, and it's okay that there are people who are scared. We should always address people's questions. We're going to do that openly, directly here, politely. We love everybody. And by the way, the folks who are opposed to this, there are a lot of folks on our side. I say it's a small minority, but there are a significant number of folks that are scared. We love them anyway. They love our Constitution. They love this country. They come from the exact same place that Tom and I do. They care about this country deeply. They care about their posterity. And so everybody, as we travel around the country, they're going to get treated with respect. They're going to get the time they deserve to ask the questions, and we're going to do everything we can to answer those questions. So I want to close with a brief story for you guys. You know, how many in here have studied more American history in the last few years than they did in their entire lives? Raise your hand. That's really hopeful, by the way, right? Our public schools aren't doing a good job. We got to do it ourselves, so that's fantastic. You know, when we teach American history in our public schools, we teach what I call the great man theory of American history and world history in general. In other words, well, who do we study? We study Washington and Adams and Madison and Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. That's what we're taught in our schools, and it's good that we learn those things. They're really inspiring stories, right? But if you want to know the real story of the American Revolution, that's not the real story. The real story is made up of people like you, regular people in town hall meetings, that got together because they cared about what was going on here on this continent. They cared about this great idea of liberty that had developed in this country. Those are the people of the American Revolution. And my very favorite story from the American Revolution is about a gentleman named Levi Preston. Captain Preston served in the Continental Army. He was right there at the first battle of the American Revolution. In 1843, he was 91 years old, and he was interviewed by one Mellon Chamberlain, who was 26 years old and a school teacher who was collecting the oral histories of the last remaining Minutemen. 91 years old, by the way, back then is real old, right? Average life expectancy was 54. So Chamberlain asked Preston a series of questions, and it goes something like this. He said, Captain Preston, when you went out to face those redcoats that day on the field of battle, what is it that drove you to fight them? Was it the Stamp Act? Were you frustrated by having to buy those stamps and place them in all your documents? Preston said, never saw one of them. The governor locked them up in the armory. That's the last we heard of it. So Chamberlain, knowing his American history, said, was it the tea tax? You were frustrated by those outrageous taxes on the tea. He said, I was a farmer. We never drank any tea. Boys dumped it in the harbor. We thought that was pretty funny. That was the end of that. He asked him, were you reading the great revolutionaries? And he named all the great revolutionary authors of the time. And Preston said, son, we read the Almanac, the Bible, Psalms, Catechism. That was about it. Never heard of any of the men you mentioned. And so Chamberlain goes big and he says, was it just British tyranny? Were you just tired of the heavy hand of British tyranny? He said, never felt a whit of it. Chamberlain says, what is it? What drove you out on the field of battle that day to fight those redcoats? And he said, son, when we went to fight those redcoats, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always meant to. And them redcoats, they meant that we shouldn't. That's it, the greatest summary of the political philosophy of the American Revolution I've ever heard in my life. And I would posit that today, that same spirit of self-governance is alive in America, and that's what drives the Convention of States movement. Thank you guys very much for being here tonight. I've been all over this country in the last 6 years. I was in 34 states last year, 12 states so far this year. And I can tell you, there's greatness out there in the American people, just like there's always been. One of the arguments you'll hear from our opponents is, well, at that convention, at the original convention, you had the Madisons and the Adams in Washington, and those people don't exist in society anymore. And that's outrageous. They exist. They exist in every state. They exist in liberal states like California and New York. They exist in the heartland. There are great men and women all over this country waiting for their moment to save the republic.